So, Juliette, before acquiring Hopoti, you previously founded Caval, which now has been evolving into the Equine Software Group. And from what I've learned so far, the Equine Software Group seems to be this umbrella ecosystem for equestrian tech and the businesses that you're investing in. And I've always found, at least in the US, getting into the tech space in the horse industry, which seems to be so rooted in tradition, can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. So I would love for you to start by taking us a little bit through your background and why it was important for you to create the Equine Software Group and start investing in other companies like Hopoti.
Yeah, for sure. It's a bit of a long story. I'll try to keep it short. But basically, so the Caval story actually started in 2017. I basically have been riding my whole life. As I mentioned, I'm French and American. I specifically learned English because I needed to ride in the US, and so I really applied myself. And essentially, for me, I was always really supported by my parents. But if I wanted to ride, I did, work in barns and catch rode horses. And basically, when I went to university, it was the first time I wasn't riding all the time. And I was part of the entrepreneurship department and wanted to sort of give back to the sport that I loved so much without riding all the time, essentially. And at the time, it started as a school project. We basically had started a marketplace which connected buyers and sellers of horses specifically at shows. It was really fun, built the interface. We raised like 25K at the time, which felt like millions. And it was really interesting because at that time, it was really early stage when some of the companies in the equestrian tech world were emerging, essentially. And basically went to shows and showed the app. And I think, horse sales is, in the broader business of an equestrian professional, presenting or marketing your horse is part of it, but it's not the entire pie, if that makes sense. But even providing more visibility for sellers, specifically at Wellington or Cala or Hits, for example, it was so amazing to see like their eyes light up and be like, wow, like this is so interesting. We would go to New England finals in Massachusetts and hand out all the binders of like horses for sale, like all these catalogs. And it was just really interesting. And basically I got involved with Juliette Chapman at the Tech Equestrian at the time and started to meet other founders. And it was just great to see, again, all these little emerging businesses in different aspects of the industry, tackling different things from, health tech for horses. At the time, there was still the halters measuring heartbeats and things like that, to little software companies that now are still working today. And basically, for me, it was just really interesting to be part of, like, close to my passion, like I said, without riding all the time. And so fast forward to after university, I ended up joining a private equity fund that was specializing in B2B software. And I realized that my marketplace, in a way, was focused on professional selling to other professionals, because in the US, it's trainers working together to purchase horses on behalf of their clients. And I kind of discovered this whole world of software where you could scale in a very vertical market from 0 to 5 to 10 to 100 million through organic growth and M&A strategy, essentially. And basically, around that time, I spent about 4.5 years there. I loved it. I think spent longer there than I had originally expected, and just saw so many companies in restaurant tech, education, equine, veterinary software, actually, as well. And just, in a parallel of this, kept seeing all these emerging software technologies. And I think, it is difficult, like you said, in the equestrian world to be moving away from traditional sport to tech. However, when I look at how far, riders and equestrian professionals have been from 2017 to today, it's almost like night and day. I think, I talked to some of our customers in Florida, and they might be using 6 different software tools to be managing different aspects of their business. Even some of the professionals that, are not tech savvy at all, they're still logging into a horse show management system to enter their horses at specific shows. So it's just, I think it definitely has evolved a lot. I still think it's very, very fragmented. So, in order to develop a competition management software, um, if you want to go into then barn management, it's a whole other set of functionality and a whole different set of customers. And so with Caval, basically the vision has evolved into this broader group, like you said, called Equine Software Group. And what we're looking to do is really kind of bring these companies under on a single umbrella where, we're not we're basically looking at businesses that are specializing in their niche and helping them work together. Because one thing that I've noticed in this, past 6 or 7, 8 years now is that these software businesses are still very much working independently. There's not a lot of integration in the market, despite a lot of the same data being transferred from one platform to the next. And so with Equine Software Group, we're really looking to, again, bring these companies together, create synergies from a customer perspective, and even for their experience, for an equestrian professional to have a single place where they can manage their horses and then, send that entry to the show system. We're basically looking to bring that together. And so our investors, interestingly, are very much private equity like investors. So they're, we're looking to do acquisitions and majority investments with the founders that we work with. And the idea is to not be like a traditional venture investors that kind of takes a seat back. We're really building alongside the management teams that join Equine Software Group. So, I think it's been amazing because if I think about 10 years ago when I first started this company, it was I was such a different person. I definitely did not know this whole other world. But it's been great to see finally this vision come through. And I think, you had a couple other questions around the time it took and the journey, but it's just been so great now that with this new group that we have, to be working with founders, and founders come to us and they want to be part of that group. They also see Equine Software Group almost as a really great exit opportunity for them, for a long-term, home for their business, for the equestrian world. So it's just been, yeah, a really incredible journey so far.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic because, I find so many equestrians might have a great idea or a specific problem that they want to solve, but they might not necessarily know exactly how to do it, how to grow it, how to scale it. And it sounds like you guys can really come in as that group to say, we're here, join us, let's all build together. And whether some of the equestrians still rooted in tradition, like it or not, the world is moving towards more tech-based, and we do have so much opportunity at our fingertips here. So what was the thing that initially drew you to Hopoti? And I love that we're really here to talk about a better business management solution for riding barns and training programs, because before I started my design agency, I worked at a lot of different lesson barns in New
Okay.
Jersey. I had my own super small program. I did a lot of work on the hunter jumper side and then also in the therapeutic riding world. So I've really seen firsthand how a lot of trainers struggle with the lesson program management. Having horses, maybe like you have your best lesson horses that are your safest, but you don't want to burn them out and overwork them. And how do you manage that ethically, but also make sure you're running a sustainable business for yourself? And even on the scheduling side for clients. So I can definitely see the value in a business like Hopoti. What initially drew you to that software?
Yeah. So in terms of our broader group strategy, with ESG, we're basically looking to invest in the very best technologies at every point in the rider journey. So the reason why we started with Hopiti, is because we were specifically looking for a business that was, whether you're become an Olympic athlete or you ride for leisure, any rider in the equestrian world starts by booking a riding lesson. And so Hopiti's positioning really started, in the riding school programs, to your point. What was really interesting about Hopiti is that they started in the Nordics, essentially. I think at this stage they have, they're probably some of the leader right now, in the Nordics at the moment. And then they have expanded in the UK, Australia, across Europe, and the US. So it was really interesting to already see that growth. And part of that, is because Hopoti is a little bit different than other software businesses out there, on this sort of business management side for writing programs. They really were started by a parent that was looking to have a better solution for their child. And so they basically originally built a marketplace where riders could come in and book a riding lesson. So for the writing program, it actually creates more visibility for them to acquire new customers, to market their camps, to market their horse shows, clinics. And then on the back side of that, they have a whole business management piece, which, to your point, in a writing program, it is a very specific type of business because you're managing lesson programs. You have regular riders, but you might have external riders that come in for camps, for example. You really have to think about, I need to get my license from the municipality to be able to operate as this business. You need to, look at customer acquisition and things like that. And so Hopoti has really kind of thought through all of that package in the business management side of their business. And then on top of that, they also created a sort of, within the marketplace now, riding schools, they can, basically communicate with their riders. Riders can earn badges, which creates retention, because if a rider comes into a new riding program, they might learn, 100% on their first riding lesson. But then the next 4 lessons after that, they, might be practicing what they learned the first time. And so the learning curve is a lot slower. And so for Hopati, they really think about retention, how to improve that for their customers. And it's been, like I said, we partner with Best in Class, and we felt like Hopati, beyond being sort of the initial investment we were looking for, really just outshined a lot of companies out there. So it's been really great to work with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I did love reading that it was actually initially created by a parent and not necessarily a trainer who needed a solution for themselves. And I see how there's so much synergy between the clients and the trainers or the barn managers. And I love that you mentioned there's a feature for communication too, because I even found when I was teaching, it is so difficult when you're running a barn or running a lesson program to have the opportunity to kind of clock out at the end of the day and
Yeah.
not have all of the texts from your clients going to your personal phone. And I just find too, there are so many trainers who are so talented and skilled at what they do, but don't necessarily have the skills or the knowledge for all of that business background. And how do you actually run a business? How do you scale a business? How do you even know how to put all of those pieces together? You might be really great at teaching, but you don't necessarily know how to market yourself or run a business. So it
Yeah.
sounds like Hopany, it kind of provides that all-in-one solution. And it sounds like as you've been working with Hopany and now it's been under your leadership, you guys have started to implement maybe some changes and updates. So what does that process look like when a company kind of comes into the Equine Software Group? What's kind of your first step there? What do you like to tackle first?
Yeah. So we, firstly, sometimes when founders hear about private equity, they often think about exiting and everything will change. We're really, our group is really about, the selection process is quite lengthy and takes several months. And that's because we really want to understand the management team's ambition. Do they want to stay? In this case, they did. They're super keen to creating this broader group. And the idea isn't to be, you know, kind of taking a control position and decide everything. It's actually very much more, how can we provide the resources to take this company to the next level? And, a lot of these software companies in the equestrian world, oftentimes they have really great tech and have thought about a lot of features, which was Hopeti's case. I think you made a point about having an all-in-one package. I think at this stage, Hopeti has truly, if I'm thinking about the holistic aspect of a riding program business. They've covered from legal to contract management to lesson scheduling and payments all in one place. And so it's really incredible to see that. But the next stage is really go to market. And, part of that, to your point, is, some equestrian businesses take a little bit of time to onboard or making that decision to take that leap because sometimes tech can be so different from their existing operations. And so what we do is really help with positioning, go to market, bring in a team of people that can help, particularly for the US, because it's such a large market. And so for us, since we've joined in November, or since the company joined our group in November, we actually ended up hiring two people in the U.S. who have been leading the U.S. operations. We totally refined our positioning at this stage. So exactly like you said around, a parent, it was from the perspective of a parent, but we like to say to our customers, we only win if our riding school wins, basically. And so we wanted to serve and give a really great experience to the parents, which ultimately, a riding school and equestrian professional, that's what they have to think about when they're running their business at the end of the day. And so it's just been really great to continue to build on that message. And yeah, it's been, we've had a big project in Florida in January Q1 timeframe, and we've onboarded several customers. We're talking to really large ones now. So it's also great to see kind of this growth hockey stick a little bit since they've joined the company. It's rewarding to see what we've been able to do. So mhm.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. And I'm curious especially as you start onboarding new barns and riding programs, is there a particular feature of Hopoti that people tend to be the most excited about? Or is there something where people have said to you, "Oh my gosh, we've been needing this. Like everyone's been missing this detail, but this is what we need."
Yeah, so I think you sort of were spot on a little earlier when you mentioned, the trainer leaves the barn, but then they are still receiving messages from clients at 5, 10 p.m. at night about scheduling and cancellations. And so it's really interesting. Sometimes our clients come to us for specific features that they're looking for. So it could be waivers because we archive them, especially in the US where that's really important. Or it might be horse care, for example, because especially the larger programs might have, 25, 30, 50 plus horses that they manage. But then the true aha moment is when they see the scheduling ability of our tool and how it really brings everything together. You can, all your riders are now coming in through this platform. Yes, it's a commitment, but once they've done that, they love it as well because they can track their training, they can track badges. And so the time that it frees up to our customers is incredible. And then I think another part of it, which is really interesting to me, is that sometimes our professionals come to us and they say, yes, I love horses. I love teaching. I'm not as much of a business person. And then we have a longer conversation and the questions that's being asked is, well, I'm thinking about my pricing, or I would like to add another group for, novice riders on Saturday mornings. And actually, even if they feel like they're not as much business oriented, the questions underlying is that they truly are. And so another feature that I think people love and kind of aha moment is we give a lot of visibility around revenue tracking, ROI or revenue sort of returns, income per horse, to see which one's doing best. If there's one horse that's maybe like less in the barn, but one rider loves it, they can get assigned every time they come. So it's really how to manage your resource as well in the stable.
Yeah.
So I would say I think it's just been really, back to your question around, what is that aha moment? I think it's really this time sent back in their day. And then after, a couple of months of usage, it's also really incredible to also see that tied to real financial impact on their business.
Yes.
So, some of our customers, actually not some, most grow between 10 to 20% after implementing Hopati, because, they can have time to think about how to grow their program, or they can have time to not have to chase people with invoices. Yeah, so that's been a big part of it as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because even, aside even from just working in lesson barns, and then even we work with a lot of trainers and barn managers through our design agency Farm and Fur. We do a lot of website build outs for them, and that's always kind of one of the biggest missing pieces is what can we integrate to reduce your admin. So the
Mhm.
website is great to tell people who you are and what you do, but what happens once you get them through the door, and what does that process look like? And I find so many trainers struggle with kind of leaving money on the table sometimes because they'll have clients paying them via cash, check,
Yeah.
Zelle, Venmo, and it is hard if you have 50 plus students that come through in a week to keep track of all of those different payment methods. So that makes a lot of sense to me. You just have everything come to one place. And even on the scheduling and availability side, I always find it so interesting that in our day-to-day lives, when we leave the barn and we kind of go off into the world and we want to book a yoga class or a class at the gym or even a nail appointment, we're so used to doing it through a website or through an app or through some sort of system that uses some sort of scheduling tech, but
Yeah.
we don't always expect that from our barns. And
Yeah.
it's time that we start treating our lessons like all of the other services that we use throughout the week or the month.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, so we try to do a study on, how much revenue would a riding program lose a year on cancellations. So if a business operates on cash payments, for example, or Venmo, once the rider actually comes to the stable and gets the service, it can vary between 50 to maybe 90, 100,000 a year that's lost because
Wow.
the rider didn't show up to the lesson, and the professional doesn't get paid. The horse that could have gone to a different lesson wasn't ridden and just stood there in the barn with tack on. And so
Yes.
we try to. I mean, that's also a big part of our revenue growth with our customers is that they can now. You want to book a riding lesson. Well, if you don't show up, I still get paid for the service I was going to owe you anyway. So yeah,
Yes.
that's it's true, and it's true to see. We actually have another team member who joined us from MindBody, which is an app for
Oh, yes.
world. Yeah,
I've used that to
I'm sure.
book, like,
Yes.
sauna services and gym
Yeah.
classes at the gym, yes.
Yeah, and having her on with her, it's been great because actually, yoga studios, maybe several years ago when MindBody was just starting, it was very similar. It was passionate, professionals who didn't necessarily think about booking systems, but once they did implement it, they just saw the amazing impact it had on their business. And so, I think it's just our responsibility to be able to help our professionals see that more and more and how it can help them and improve their day to day, basically.
Yes. No, I completely agree. And I'm curious, we've talked a little bit about how I think on the student side, it's probably very easy to get them to adapt to new systems because we're used to using apps and scheduling features for a lot of different things that we do week to week. Have you seen any challenges getting some of these barns to kind of ditch their old systems, come on board with a new one, and what would you say to people who are maybe still a little bit skeptical to take that leap? You've mentioned you have the data on how you can help increase their revenue through these systems, but from kind of that person to person connection, thinking about like some of these old school horse people,
Yes.
what would you say to get them to make the move to a system like Hopoti?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I think, you know, we actually have several more traditional, passionate horse people that decided to take the leap and use our system. And you're right. Sometimes it comes with a little bit of skepticism and change. At the end of the day, you're asking someone who has run a business for sometimes 25 plus years to be changing their process, which can feel scary. And so for us, what we typically say is obviously there is a financial aspect to it, which is one part. But the second piece, I think an area that resonates with every professional I speak to is, I wish I could, sometimes have more time to, find a partner in the horse world because it could be a very isolating sport.
Yes.
Or I would like to spend more time with my family and have, not feel like I have to be involved in the operations of the barn all the time, but actually my barn manager and new instructors can take care of it. Or I want to be able to go on holiday. We actually joke in Finland, where this company was started, that some of our early customers, when I went to visit them in November, they said, "Well, no, this owner now goes and lives in Spain because her instructors are running everything." Yeah, um, but yeah, I mean, and that I think does resonate with some of these more traditional stable owners. And so, it is what we want to be as helpful as we can. So oftentimes with some of those customers, we typically come up with a plan, where we say, all right, this is going to be a change in process. We want to be live in 4 weeks to start accepting transactions. Let us kind of work towards that goal. And it is, we are quite upfront. It is a commitment. It is a change in process. And I think as long as we're transparent, but we sympathize with their situation, oftentimes it does really make a meaningful difference for them. And, we've had someone that's not tech savvy at all, who came with that exact reason. And now she's been, voicing about our solution for the past several weeks. So it's just great to see that impact. So to your point, it's not all the time about financial and growing, because sometimes it's not about growth. It's just about having a more sustainable business, to be able to ride, to be able to spend time with your family. And that's what Hopoti is able to hopefully give to some of our customers.
Yeah, it's a good point because I find with so many businesses in the horse industry, they often start out of a passion for horses or for riding. And sometimes it can be really hard to then find that work-life balance when you turn your passion into a business. And I think anytime you can just bring better systems to your business, you just instantly get that work-life balance, pretty quickly as a result. You mentioned that originally Hopati started in Finland, and I know now you guys are working on really marketing more in the US. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in maybe your marketing approaches in different areas and maybe how you're approaching marketing in the US versus how it was maybe being marketed in Finland or across Europe or the UK?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we partnered with Hopati, they actually already had quite a bit of a presence in the US, in the sense that we work with very large programs in Virginia and Maryland from some of the previous projects. But I would say, in Europe, and a part of Equine Software Group strategy has been focused on Europe, because I do think that a lot of what happens in the equestrian world first starts in Europe and then moves to the US. And so what we found is that there has been more equestrian technology businesses of scale, I would say, in countries around Europe than the US. So in Europe, I would say, for example, with Finland and the broader Nordics, Hopati's approach was very much to partner with the federations, which were very big promoters of the technology, because to them, one of the things that I also love about Hopati is in they really focus in the early stage of the sport, basically. So driving new riders to, book riding lessons, to be retained, to, get to that point in the sport where you're just hooked, basically. Um, and so for the federations in Finland, it was a way for them to get new members. So once the, new riders were coming to the platform, they were pushed, to potentially become members of the Finnish Federation, which for them was a really great situation because it just meant that the sport was growing. And then fast forward to the US, I think in the US, I think, like I said, I think the early days were certainly more difficult, because when you're in the US, brand is extremely important. And in Europe, for a lot of founders, not just in the equestrian world, just in tech in general, product is more important than brand, actually.
Oh, that's
um, yeah,
interesting. I
there,
didn't know that. That's
yeah.
really, really interesting to learn.
Yeah, so a lot of founders in general in tech, in Europe, they're very focused on product, and what you're marketing is exactly what's behind in the product. In the US, oftentimes, which is why sometimes there's a lot more capital invested in the US, it's very much marketing, sales, what you're pitching, your idea, and then product will come, but it could be an MVP before it's a real product, basically, which is really interesting. But it basically means that when Hopoti came to the US originally, there was, I think, a lot of work at the time, at least from their previous projects, to get the brand up and running. And we got some really great customers, like Full Moon Farm and Meadowbrook in the Virginia area, that are incredible businesses that we work with. That essentially, sort of gave Hopoti a bigger stance in the US, I would
Yeah.
say. And then since we've, backed the company, I think we've done a lot of work on how to continue to build out the brand. So it's very much been word of mouth related. We work with a lot of organizations. For example, we started working with the UDJC in Florida, which is a new organization thinking about rider levels associated to horse show circuits, essentially. And so they have about 200, 300 riding schools now that are part of their program. So basically, very much a lot of in-person events, building out the brand, because I think even today, and especially in the US, I think, AI is certainly something that's talked about.
Mhm.
Even if you're in the horse world, you hear about AI, I would say. And, I do think our product at this stage has a lot of maturity and data that we can bring to our customers, not just to be just a software solution, but we can actually, help you think about all these other things in your business where, technology is just a foundational brick. So, for example, in Florida, we did a sort of workshop session where we brought a attorney that was doing a lot of contract for staff and for waivers and advising riding school professionals. We brought an insurance provider that partnered with us basically to help these businesses get better coverage for their extreme sport business, essentially. And so it's really much about community and brand, and again, being a partner in the US, and how to continue to build on to that with Hopiti is really what we're trying to do. And just to give you another example without giving you too much to all rambling on, but is we another part that we focus on a lot is curriculum, and how to help riding schools build curriculums that basically creates retention with their riders, and they keep coming back, and then they can evolve as they move up into new levels in the sport. And so we partner, for example, with Ridely, which basically bridges our physical presence in the barn and riding at the barn, and then learning content outside of the barn, essentially. So when your rider leaves the stable, are they still thinking about paying you or monetizing with you when they're not even at the stable, essentially, which a lot of riders are. They're watching a lot of content. They're scrolling on Instagram to look at horses. And so, that's really this brand that we're trying to create from a marketing perspective in the US. And I think that's been some of the largest difference that we've seen, even in how we sell with customers versus even now in Finland. It's a totally different sell, I would say, from that perspective. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I had no idea that there would be so many differences in the nuance between the two. And I love that you mentioned Ridley, because that was something I wanted to ask you about. And I think, now I guess in the US we've coined it as like this horse girl movement, but I think a lot of us who have grown up in the US loving horses, we, like you said, we don't want to just leave the barn and kind of clock out of holding on to that identity. We're reading horse books, we're watching Heartland, we're like finding all of these ways to keep horses as part of our daily life. And I think it's so smart, because I find so many lesson barns that maybe don't have students who necessarily have show goals. You still have students who do want to grow and develop as riders, or even just develop their horsemanship skills. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes it's hard when you're running a business to then come up with creative ways to help riders grow in that way. So I think that that's really cool and really smart. One of the other things I've seen that's a really important aspect of Hopity is, we've talked about a little bit, is that emphasis on equine welfare and how your system helps trainers understand the workload management between all of the horses in their lesson barn. And I find that to be so interesting, because there can be so much friction sometimes between being super ethical to the horses that we love, but then also running and growing a business. So sometimes horses become this tool to continue to grow. Why was that an important thing for you guys to focus on for Hopoti?
It's a very good question. So as I mentioned, one of the parts of the Hopiti platform is that we can track how horses are paying their bills at the end of the month. Is the simplest way of explaining it. And to your point, this matching of horse workload versus how much profits you're getting out of a horse is a very it's an yeah to your point, it's an ethical question. And so what we've seen is that sometimes you know, our businesses come to us and they have a very specific idea, or they feel like they have some idea of what the workload of their horses are. And then they, at the end of the month, or 6 months later, they review the platform and they come back and they're like, wow, I didn't realize that, this horse um, that actually is liked by a lot of students, because as I mentioned, a lot of students can actually like specific horses or request them. They don't have to, it's not public, but they can request horses they like if they want to. And it gives the business owner the ability to see, wow, like actually, rather than using peanut butter at 2 p.m. every single time, maybe we'll free up that time so that I can use this other horse with this specific rider, because, it's actually freeing up a little bit of time for this horse to maybe be out a little bit more in the pasture, and then the other one to be able to work a little bit more. And so it's just, it's certainly a key part of what we think about with Hopiti. We have features that basically block. So if you are thinking about a horse and you say, well, I want to do 2 jumping lessons and 1 flat lesson, for example, once that horse is booked off in the calendar, another instructor or someone that doesn't have the same level of information as a director, for example, won't be able to book that horse in again. So it creates more visibility across all those different people and workers that are in a stable, which is good. It allows people to allocate their horses maybe in ways that they didn't imagine before, that returns better investment. And one other piece that I've noticed a lot, especially with some of our highest performing businesses, is that they actually have this approach. They're not at all the factory approach where you think they're just like spinning around horses and putting them in the next lesson. Actually, they're the ones that treat their horses like colleagues. And yes, you have to go to work, and everybody has to, at the end of the day, work to get food at the end of the day on the table. But because they have a more ethical approach, their horses are healthier. They can work better. They're happier. They're more liked by the students. So it does create a better environment. And in the end, it's interesting because it just truly bridges horse welfare with a higher performing business. And the last thing I'll say too is, part of Hopati's idea is also, in order to, by giving more hours to our professionals and by growing their revenue, essentially we believe that our professionals can lead better lives at the end of the day. And if they can lead better lives and they have more money, as we know, they're passionate horse people. And at the end of the day, we know that they will do right by the horse. And this we hear across every single customer that we work with. And so we also believe that our platform intrinsically enables that for our customers and the businesses we work with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a really good point, because when you stop having to put maybe so much pressure on your horses to kind of be your moneymaker, and you can kind of sit back and have some solutions that just reduce your stress and admin as a whole. Like you said, it just makes for a more sustainable business, but then a happier business owner. So I
Yes.
can definitely see how those things go hand in hand, and it is so important.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, it's just been, yeah. We work with a business in the UK actually, and she cares so much about horse welfare. She actually implemented the horse welfare score with Ridley, and she started. Her story is really incredible. She started with 3 horses, or no, 16 horses when she bought the place. All these horses ended up being sick and passed away. She ended up with three horses.
Wow.
Um, and then she grew her business to 50 plus horses now, and she's expanded her business, dramatically. And she always says, at the end of the day, horse welfare is so key to this. And it's, when you're running such a big operation, I think it's very fascinating to see, yeah, how you can bridge. those two different worlds that can be a little bit controversial sometimes. So yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
1000%. And, I've even seen, most of the lesson barns that I've worked in have been definitely much more on the smaller scale. But I think it's so tricky sometimes for trainers to decide when is it time to make the investment in that next lesson horse, and what does that look like. But when you
Mm.
have a system where you can actually look at how much money you're bringing in every month, and then also look at the workload that's spread across your current horses, I imagine it just makes a lot of those businesses decisions much easier.
Yeah, and another request that we get quite a bit, actually from businesses of all sizes, is if they're looking to make that investment in a new lesson horse, they might come to us and say, "Hey," because we have a lot of client information, and who is their regular and external clients, and they might come to us and say, "Hey, we were thinking about getting a new horse and a new pony. What would you advise us based on the highest performing lessons or horses that we had in our program?" And actually, back to this data piece I was talking about, we actually have the answers to those questions and can provide at least some guidance
Yeah.
to the professional to feel a little bit safe that the investment that they're making is actually returning money at the end of the month. So that's
Yes.
another piece which surprised me when I first joined the company, that we got these requests, and it's really cool to see as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you can always predict what you think may be some of your customers' biggest pain points, but it sounds like you guys actually spend a lot of time talking to and getting to know and advising your clients. So you seem to really have that human connection, even though you're building a tech company, which
Yes.
I love. And I imagine that's such an important aspect working with horse people in particular, because so much of our industry does thrive on that human to human connection as well.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is, we unlike a lot of software businesses that are really related to like task management in the barn, our programs are trusting us with their business, with the revenue that comes through at the end of the day, every month, and that will pay their bills. And so we just find that it's so important to be close to them, to feel like another part of their team in a way, even if we're not going to be there all the time. Hopoti will. And so I think that's been really core to how the brand's been built, even in Finland and Europe. I think that closeness is really, yeah, I think it helps everyone and to grow and to have a sustainable business. So it's been really important for us. Yeah. Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. On that topic of just growth and how you think about that client relations management, we've talked a lot about the important features of Hopity and how people are using the platform. I would love to talk a little bit and get some advice from you for other equestrians who maybe have an idea for an app or something, maybe in the tech space, or even just starting. Even you probably know so much about growing, running, and managing training barns by now. You can probably speak to that as well. What would be the first or best piece of advice that you could give an equestrian who is looking to maybe start something on the lesson program side or on the tech side?
Mm, mm. Okay. So on the tech side, what I would say is definitely if someone is looking to build a business now in the equestrian tech industry, I think there's two critical pieces. One, there's been a lot of focus in the higher end of the market, which is true. There's a lot of money being transacted at the higher end. But the reality is, the market is, even though if it feels very big, it's a lot slimmer in terms of quantity than people expect when they first come into this business. So I would say definitely think about the more critical mass. Also, because I'm a huge believer in sport longevity and access to the sport. I think that if a lot of money is being poured at the top, you're forgetting about the new entrants in this space. And I think that's extremely important for the future of the equestrian industry.
Great point.
And then I think, yeah. And then the second point I was going to make, which is more micro point, um, I think, and this is maybe one of the areas I learned early on with the initial Caval idea, is you really have to think about what is the true size of the transaction I'm going to be able to tap into. So to give you an example, There's a lot of barn management whiteboard software replacements out there.
Mhm.
And, it's great to have that kind of, task management and more visibility, especially if you're a very big breeding program. For example, in Europe, there's a lot of those. But I do think that you have to think a little bit beyond just that piece and brick in the technology, because it just will open up a larger market for the person developing their company. And it's already, to your point earlier, quite hard to scale and to get that go to market up and running. That when you're starting a business, you want to think a little bit bigger, or how big is truly my transaction size and that I'm able to capture, basically. And it's the same thing with, for example, the initial Caval idea. When I mentioned, yes, I was focusing in horse sales, but my idea was really a visibility tool for horse
Yes.
sales. We weren't going to go after the actual transaction. It was a much smaller piece of the pie, if that makes sense. So just thinking a little bit bigger, I would say, is what I would advise. And then on the equestrian professional side, um, well, I think today it's certainly, whether or not a professional uses a tech company to run their business, I do think that the rules on how to operate an equestrian business has changed, in the sense that back in the day, the equestrian business, you could come in, you could start your business, you it was a little bit more accessible, a little less expensive. Shows were certainly not as commercialized as they are today. And so I think now it is very important to have different pillars checked off in the ways you operate. So we mentioned the waivers and sort of the contract side, like safe sport, for example, is something that was introduced in recent years and that trainers have to deeply think about, basically.
Yeah.
So I would say, if a lot of new entrepreneurs actually come in to work with us to start implementing our platform, as like, maybe they'll have a bit of a preferential rate so that they can scale with us, is the
Mhm.
idea. um, we do believe that you really have to think about what is going to be my infrastructure to run this and my system to run this. And depending on the professionals, we have some, I have a lot of friends who went on and they're really in the buy and sell business and they're jumping at the Grand Prix level. And then I have other friends who decided to go the riding program route, actually. And I think, there's really thinking about retention really early
Mhm.
on. So, am I creating a program where I will have visibility in the next 6 months? So, what I mean by that is, a lot of our really good schools, work on a semester based model. So they'll have, a season ticket for, January through June, for example, and then they'll offer camps from June to August, and then another season from September to December, basically. So cash flow visibility is super important. Retention. So the ones that we see perform really well are entrepreneurs that come in and they, maybe target younger children. The reason for that is because if you're starting with a child and the hope is you'll provide a really great business to them, and they're 7, 8, 10 years old, your business will naturally grow. And what I mean by that is you can offer lessons, but hey,
Mhm.
now, this rider wants to jump meter 10, or do the sort of equitation finals. Well, now you can find and lease a horse to them, and maybe they've leased a horse and now they want to buy a horse, and they need to store that horse somewhere, so you can start offering board services. And maybe at some point in that process, they might believe in you so much that their parents will say, hey, like, we want to go and invest in you to buy a horse in Europe and sponsor you to do that. And really kind of going through that whole journey with the clients that you work with and creating a model that really benefits retention, I think is super important for new entrepreneurs out there, because I think it will bring in more riders into the space. I think parents are, I think horse riding, especially in the US, has become more of a fashionable thing to do. Um, and I think they're looking to get their kids off their screen, most importantly. And the sport is a way for kids to do that. So I do think there's actually a lot of opportunity for new riding programs in the US at the moment. It's been great to see a lot of new entrepreneurs come into the space.
Yeah, it's a great point because you can't look down on the beginner riding programs because those are the programs that are, like you said, getting a new generation into the sport, and then that retention aspect is so important, and now you have years and years to grow with those
Yes.
students, and help them, achieve their goals. So I love that you mentioned that, because I think sometimes people focus on maybe kind of like the more glitzy or shiny aspects of the sport, or you want to be taken really seriously as a show barn, which can be nice as well. But sometimes, like you said, just starting at the most basic level and encouraging that next generation can just be such a great foundation and starting point.
Yeah, because I also think that, to go from young, working student, young professional to, working show barn, the route there is either you work for a show barn and eventually you step into that role. But if you really want to go off on your own and you're not, you haven't won medal finals or competed, at the upper levels in Wellington, I think it's very, very hard to build that credibility. And so, starting small, creating a model where you're creating retention, growing with your riders, you, I 100% believe that these professionals will get there because, if they can grow, the glitzy part is going to happen. It's just going to happen a little bit later with a bigger set of riders and it will be fully yours, basically, is the,
Yes.
the thought. So, yeah. And I think on the broader growth of the sport, it's just been really interesting to see a lot of the new circuits that have pop up in the space. I think there's a lot of circuits out there that again are focused in the elite part of the sport. And I think there's a real opportunity, for example, with the UDJC or other organizations out there to create a more relatable way to the top, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. So,
Yeah.
when a parent comes in to the sport and sees the top level as Jessica Springsteen, it's great, but am I going to be the parent that has the means to take my kid to the level of Jessica Springsteen? It's hard
That's a
to
good
relate
point.
even for that child. So I
Mhm.
think there's truly a really great opportunity and a gap in the industry right now to enable that, I think. And so yeah, I think there's for new entrepreneurs, I would say there's a really great opportunity to build a nice writing program business. And we've seen a lot of our kind of more entrepreneurial businesses, they run almost like a franchise. They'll have 3 or 2 or 3 riding programs that they run in different locations and they're living a great life. So yeah, there's that opportunity as well. Yeah.
True. No, it's great insight. I'm curious to know where you see equestrian and tech going in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, of course, there are so many conversations now around AI, but even beyond that, I would love to know where do you see tech and the equestrian world moving?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think it's been really firstly, in the past, 3, 4, 5 years, it's been great to see all of this different emerging technologies. Like I said, very fragmented, very siloed. I think in the equestrian tech world, I do believe that these companies will start to work together more and more. I think integration will be key because like I said, you can't have 15 different horse show management systems and one bar management system that doesn't speak to each other. I think that will dramatically evolve. I think that the rules of running an equestrian business has changed. That today, coming into the sport, it's not just about starting your operation and people come in from the county fair and they get to ride or do pony rides. It's really turned into a lot more commercialized sport, especially at the horse shows, which has become more and more expensive. So I do believe that now an equestrian professional, whether or not they think about tech, they definitely have to think about their businesses in different pillars, whether it's social media strategy and brand and how I showcase myself to my client, or it's legal and, am I compliant to Safe Sport and how I'm texting my riders, or am I compliant with my waivers? Because I think more and more in the US, it's become more and more litigious. And so I really do believe that, an equestrian business has to think about that infrastructure when they're coming in today's world. And I really believe that tech is going to be a driving force and part of that infrastructure. Just like, you come in and you have to have specific trunks or horse buckets, having some sort of technology to enable you to run your business is going to be a key part of how you have a successful business in the next 5 years. So I think it's really going to be a lot more integration, openness to implementing technology in the sports. I also think data is going to be a very core part of the future. Beyond AI, I think, data around horse performance, data around riders, data around I communicate to my adults at 7 p.m. on Saturdays and or 7 p.m. on Mondays, and then Saturday mornings at 9. All of that data needs to be leveraged in insights and ways that an equestrian professional can understand and use it to build a more sustainable business. So I don't believe that tech is going to be the only reason why a business succeeds or not, but I do believe it's going to be a really core part of their brick in their infrastructure. And it's just going to be part of a bigger pillar of how to run a good business, essentially. So that's
Yeah.
where I see it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it makes a lot of sense because you don't want to feel as though you're piecemealing your business together. You want to feel as though from the very start, you can have that all-in-one solution that sets that strong foundation and just takes a lot of the guesswork out of it.
Yes.
So,
Hmm.
I love your background as a founder, and I haven't asked any questions like this yet on the podcast, but I know you do a lot of travel. From what I know of you, I would consider you to be a high performer, and I always find it so fascinating thinking about like daily routines or daily habits. Is there anything that you practice day to day to keep working at this level?
Yeah, it's a good. I love that question. I think so. For me, it's not really part of. Well, it is part of my routine, but it's not a very specific thing I do every day. I would say, but I think it's important to sometimes take the time for yourself. And what I mean by that is, even though it's going to sound crazy. On weekdays, I will wake up at 5:30 to go ride my horse in the morning before I start work. And even though
Wow.
it's very early in the morning, by the time I get to work at 9 a.m., it's gonna be just my day just like changes dramatically. And so I think to be at the top level, um, that's something that came with me as well from the sport. You need to be able to take care of yourself first. So what that means is, to have enough sleep, eat well, most importantly, but also take the time to do something that you love because it just
Mhm.
grounds you because you're in a high performance environment. You have to be on all the time. And if you have this moment of grounding, I think it just makes you a higher performer. And even if you're a bit tired, see things with more clarity, I would say. So, mhm.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think sometimes, see on social media all the time, especially on Instagram, this glamorization sometimes of like hustle culture and like
Mhm.
founder energy, and there are always going to be those times in your business where it ebbs and flows. Sometimes you may feel like you're hustling during some seasons, and then others you can take your foot off the gas and give yourself that balance. But I think it's such important advice because you can't show up for your business in the way that you need to or for your employees in the way that you need to if you're not grounded yourself. And if that means getting up at 5:30 in the morning to do what you love before you start your day, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think in terms of the team and yeah, the people I work with, I think they're looking also for me for direction, and my energy does the energy I give is what's going to be reflected basically. And so I think if I can take that time, and that's the same thing I expect with my team, if they can take the time and maybe they log off a little bit earlier, and the next day we're ready to go. I think it just creates a much higher performing environment for everyone. And yeah, that's with our company. I would say one thing I've been trying to be very clear about is we're a horse company at the end of the day. So if you need to go away at lunchtime to go ride your horse and then you'll work a little bit later in the evening, like that's what you should be doing. Because otherwise, what's the fun in doing all of this if we're not enjoying it? So yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
super important to show up
Yeah.
for yourself. Mhm.
And to keep that passion alive and just always remember the guiding light. I think horses for so many of us are the guiding light in our businesses and our brands, and it's why we started off on these journeys in the first place.
Yeah.
So I would love to end with my favorite question that I always ask all of our guests. And I think you answered this a little bit in, kind of those first steps that an entrepreneur can take when they're thinking about their business. But if you were sitting across from a fellow equestrian entrepreneur today, what is the biggest piece of your story or your journey that you would want them to remember and walk away with?
Hmm. I would say, keep if you have an idea that is continuing to work in the back of your mind, um, I would say just continue to lean into it as much as you can. And, Caval started in 2017. We raised and closed our fund in July of 2025. So it was a whole journey for us to get here. And I think, I really believe in the power of visualization. So if you really want something, even if you put this idea and you put it in the back of your mind and you continue on with your life, you're going to eventually make decisions where maybe 10 years later, you'll look back and you'll be like, wow, like all these little decisions I made led me to this exact moment. So I would say continue to lean in and hear your what ifs and, keep working at it. And yeah, and what makes sense in your life, I think is super important, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, don't ignore that little message in the back of your
Yes.
mind. If you wake up every day and you keep thinking to yourself, if I could only do this, or if I could only start that, or this is a dream, but I don't know if I can make it a reality. Hopefully these conversations and these stories will show you that you do need to take those dreams seriously and take the steps to make it a reality at some point.
Yeah, and I would say, one piece of, detail I didn't mention is I tried to raise in 24 and it didn't work out. And we kept in touch with an amazing investor. Her name is Lacey Wismer, and she truly, believed in my idea, but she was like, hey, I just need to learn more about this market, understand your vision, and just like building on these relationships, which eventually she was part of our new fund. And it's just, keep talking to people that inspire you and continue to work hard. I think eventually things will eventually happen. I really believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't give up at your first no, and a no isn't always a firm no. Maybe it just means not right now.
Yes,
And I'm
exactly.
sure there is so much that can happen in that meantime when you feel as though you face a little bit of rejection, and then you get to kind of switch gears or maybe think about your approach a little bit differently for the next time. There's so much value and
Oh, yeah.
learning that can come in that meantime.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly right. Taking feedback and just like learning from it, I think is so important. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a big reason as why we're here today, for sure. For sure.
Yes. Well, before you go, Juliette, I would love for you to tell us what else do we have to look forward to with Hopoti, and is there anything up and coming that you want to share?
Yeah, so well, I would say with Hopoti, where the team is up and running in the U.S. We're currently offering special summer pricing to work with our our entrepreneurs to be having a free month potentially to work with us. So yes, we would love to work with other businesses at the moment. That'd be great. And then in terms of the group level. Well, I think you can expect maybe a few more companies joining us this year. Hopefully, one particular in the near term that we're excited to announce. And yeah, hopefully, just better services for our customers, I think would be the idea for the rest of the theme for the next year at least, and definitely the next 10.
Well, now I can't wait to see who this next company is. I'll be keeping an eye out on
Yes.
where LinkedIn or Instagram. Where's the best place to connect with
Yes.
you? And I'll put everything in the show notes for our listeners.
Yes. So we are mostly on LinkedIn at the moment with Equine Software Group and Caval. I'll share that with you afterwards. And I think we'll build more of an Instagram presence a little bit. But right now, mostly LinkedIn is where we live at the moment. And Hopoti, for sure, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook as well. We're quite active there.
Amazing. Perfect. I'll put the links in the show notes for everyone. Well, thank you,
Thank
Juliette, so
you.
much for joining us and sharing your story and giving us some insights into what it really takes to scale tech in the horse industry. I think a lot of our listeners will get a lot of value out of that.
Thank you so much, Tara. It was really great to spend this time with you. And yeah, thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Of course. Thanks for joining.